Brothers and sisters, we seek safety and refuge in the only place of peace, and that is As-Salam, our peaceful perfection in the Creator, Provider, and Sustainer of the heavens and the earth, the source of our existence, the one that gave us meaning, the one who has filled us with favors and blessings. We seek to remember Him in our daily life and recognizing our purpose and meaning and having gratitude and thanks for this beautiful life and everything in it. And in this life, we will struggle with how do we make ends meet? How do we find our clarity? How do we have patience and steadfastness? And so He gave us the most beautiful blessing in the example of the Prophet ﷺ, whom we ask Him to send His peace and blessings and mercy on, as he was sent so that all of humanity could recognize divine mercy and compassion. We look to embody the Quranic mode of being mindful of our duty to God, that we recognize that speech that comes with truth, that brings justice, and behaviors that align with the revelation in the Quran and the Sunnah are the sole means to success. There is no other kind of success that means anything in the grand scheme of things. So in that notion, I wanted to talk about the Nakba. Next Thursday will be May 15th. May 15th is the commemoration of the Nakba. What is the Nakba? It is the catastrophe that happened in Palestine in 1948. The Nakba is the disaster in which the Holy Land was desecrated institutionally. The place where prophets walked and taught a devotion to the God and His oneness. They taught that people should treat their neighbors as themselves. A system was revealed to bring social welfare and upliftment to be established. So from 1948 and that catastrophe in May back then, the establishment of a state and an institution that now has a majority of atheists, so people who don't believe in God. And it has a whole system in which people are abusing and humiliating and torturing their neighbors and mistreating them institutionally by systematic oppression. So the Nakba is started with an ideology called Zionism. Zionism as a word, it means that Jewish people around the world should find a homeland. They had been all over the world in many different places. And so some European Jews came up with an idea, we need to have a homeland. And so that is the idea that Zionism is that Jews go to a place and that becomes their home. The main founder of this ideology was a European man named Theodor Herzl. This man wrote, "Universal brotherhood is not a beautiful dream. Antagonism is essential to man's greatest efforts." So the founder of this ideology knew that for this ideology to succeed, we're going to have to attack some natives somewhere. We're going to have to remove them. We're going to have to put them under us because we will have to have our own state and we don't have a state. So there will be some sort of conflict. The United Nations in the 1970s adopted a resolution, UN Resolution 3379, which said, "We determined that Zionism is a form of racism and racial discrimination." So the UN is agreeing to this, that this conflicting, non-human brotherhood approach is problematic and we should oppose it. So why do we commemorate May 15th as the Nakba? Well, after World War II, a block of Western nations, France, Great Britain, United States, they devised a partition plan for what was called the British Mandate of Palestine. The British were still occupying the land of Palestine, and they said, okay, we're going to partition it. And so they adopted a resolution in November of 1947, and they officially, by international law, divided that Palestine would have 55% a Jewish state, and 45% would be an Arab state, and Jerusalem would be an internationally observed area. That is the international law. Now, Palestinians were obviously not consulted and did not agree to this resolution. Neither were the neighboring Arab municipalities. But they made that law, which is why if you go into the United Nations in New York or in Europe, you will see a map on the world. This is the only place you'll see this map, that it defines the Holy Land as Israel, Palestine, and Jerusalem, which is why they use the term occupation, occupiers. Because according to the international law of 1948, Israel has been illegally occupying. This is not like just something we say as what we feel like how, this is the actual law. They are criminals since then, according to everybody's understanding of international law. Nobody's doubting that. So from that point on, when they openly announced that, Zionist groups intensified their attacks in Palestine. There is many documented reports of unarmed Palestinian civilians indiscriminately killed during this campaign. There have been multiple mass graves that were found since then. So between December of 1947, when they made the announcement, and May 14th of 1948, when Israel announced themselves as a state, more than 175,000 Palestinians were expelled from their homes, and 200 villages and urban centers were destroyed. There's a Jewish documentary called Tentura. You can go watch it. It's in Hebrew. It was made by an Israeli. And it was about, talking to the actual soldiers, the Israeli veterans, about this war and their quest to take over the land. And in this documentary, you can watch these Israeli soldiers, who are now, many of them 80 years old, laughing about murdering civilians and raping women. You can watch that with your own eyes. So on May 14th, 1948, Zionists declared the State of Israel. Thus, May 15th is the memorial of the great catastrophe, the Nakba. That's why it is. So the Zionists, they continued after the establishment of their state, that they called, they continued to push something that they wrote, which you can go read yourself. It's their documented thing called Plan Dalet. Plan Dalet is what the Zionist armies had said in it. We must destroy whole villages. We should set fire to villages of Palestinians. We should blow them up. And we should plant mines in the debris so that if they come back, they will be destroyed. And they wrote in their Plan Dalet, which you can read, that the Arab population must be expelled outside the borders of the state. So, and this is not like an opinion. This is in the archives of Israeli history that they have. So the Arab armies did come when they started to see this and hear about this to defend their neighbors. But they were massively outgunned, technology and means and resources, by this Zionist army. So by 1949, when the end of this war between those Arab armies that sought to try to stop this aggression, Israel had captured 78% of Palestine, meaning what? 23% more than what the law said. So they're already going against the law. From moment one, these terrorists are going against international law and mistreating their neighbors, which in the partition plan, if you read all of it, everybody has to respect everybody. They weren't doing that from the get-go. So the remaining 22% remains under Arab control. Zionist forces killed at least 13,000 Palestinians. They destroyed and depopulated 530 villages. Imagine, 530 places that were known as Palestinian villages. They were depopulated, and there were 30 massacres documented, and 750,000 Palestinians were forced to leave their homeland. Now, everything I have just said to you is well documented in the archives of Israel and Great Britain and the United States. I know that because Israeli historian Ilan Pappé pulls out in his book, Ethnic Cleansing in Palestine, in which he says the plan with all of the Zionist founders from the 1890s, the plan was ethnic cleansing from moment one. We have to remove these Arabs. We have to make a Jewish state. And so that's what they did, and that's what they're doing, and that is what this genocide is about. So this is the root of the problem. Any discussion to solve a problem has to go to the source of the problem. Imagine someone has parasites, and they go to the doctor, and the doctor says, yep, I've found that you have parasites here. And then the doctor says, here's what we're going to give you this medicine. They say, no, don't give me that medicine, okay? Just keep giving me other medicines that take care of the symptoms. Let's talk about the symptoms. Me and you, as a doctor. How do you think that doctor thinks? This person is crazy. Yeah? This is exactly what's been going on since day one. They want to talk about things that happen after and reactions and things that are happen as a result of the ideology of Zionism as a racist, ethnic cleansing, genocidal ideology established itself in Palestine and did what it did from moment one in the early 1900s. So an important part of understanding the terrorism upon which the state of Israel was founded is knowing that Zionism called for the European Jews to colonize Palestine early 1890s. There were hundreds per month going. Now, in 1917, when Alfred Balfour, the foreign minister of the British Empire, he then announced a declaration directed towards the banking elitist Baron Rothschild, who is a Zionist, who has probably the largest banking family in the history of humanity. And he said there will be a Jewish state in Palestine. So at that time in 1917, the British are occupying Palestine, and clearly this very wealthy banking person has made his plea however you would make your plea as him. Okay? And so then the British government is saying, we're going to give you a Jewish state in Palestine. So from the 1920s to 1948, there were three Zionist terrorist groups. One's called Haganah, one is called the Irgun, and one is called the Lehi. And these terrorist groups on a monthly basis are committing acts of terror against both Palestinians and the British in Palestine from 1920 to 1948. They were committing this terror during and before the Holocaust. So they were there doing terror. It's not like, oh, well, after the Holocaust we felt like this was already their plan before that. Okay? So this is all well documented. What I just told you sounds, again, if you don't know, sounds like a conspiracy theory. But there's a whole book written by Thomas Suarez called Palestine Hijacked. You go into the bibliography, and it goes back to Hebrew-Israeli archives, just like we're hearing about JFK and Epstein and all that stuff now. They have that stuff there. They document what they do. And the British have it documented. And that's where they're pulling from. None of this is opinions. None of this, oh, I feel, or somebody said. These are all well-documented historical facts. Okay? So these acts of terror by these groups were so terrible that once Israel was founded, and Israel knows because they're the ones documenting that these groups were doing terrorism, they officially labeled the Haganah, the Irgun, and the Lehi as terrorist groups and banned them, that there will be no longer these groups allowed in the new state of Israel in 1948 and on. Even though a large portion, if not the vast majority of their fighters in their independence war were these terrorist groups. So what they did was they just transferred the name to the new propagandized Israeli Defense Forces, right? And then later the Mossad, and then the Shin Bet. So Haganah, Irgun, Lehi was some bad names that are well documented related to very bad things. So they came up with new names. I thought, let's make sure we present this case very well that these are the good guys. Even though they continue doing the same kind of things after that. So in the 1950s, there are many documented facts by former Mossad agents that they were doing false flag terror operations in the 1950s. That the Mossad would go into Iraq and they would go into North Africa where Jewish civilizations were, and they would make a terror attack against the Jews and kill Jews over there. And then they would send out their announcement that we're the Muslim terror group. Sound familiar? And that these Jews are allegiance to Israel and they're not stopping Israel and this and that and the other. Why were they doing this? Because they want all of the Jews of the world to move to Israel so it can truly be a Jewish state, because it's still a very small percentage of the people there are Jewish, even then. So then people start to migrate in mass numbers because they're telling them, we'll give you free. We'll pay your ticket. We'll do this. We'll give you a home. Come to your homeland, so that they can prove their point. So in June of 1967, Israel launched a massive aerial assault, starting with Egypt, the strongest military in the land, and Syria and elsewhere, Jordan, and destroyed almost completely, like 90% of their air force capacity, and left their military in shambles. Within 6 days, Israel had taken the entirety of Palestine, occupied the entirety, continuing to expand its borders, going against international law, and they took the Golan Heights from Syria, and they took the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt. You cannot claim to be defending yourself when you're expanding your borders massively against the international laws. And it's well documented that they started that war from a military standpoint, even though there were skirmishes happening periodically on the borders, but that was a military assault. So now for context, as this genocide is happening right now that we're all watching, the United Nations commemorated the Nakba on May 15th of 2023. Pay close attention. Watch how things happen. So in May, 6 months before the genocide started, the United Nations for the first time came up and officially made an address recognizing the Nakba. And so Rosemary DiCarlo, who is the Undersecretary of the United Nations, she's the Undersecretary General for Political and Peace Building Affairs. She addressed the assembly saying, Palestinians deserve a life of justice and dignity and realization of their right to self-determination and independence. The UN position is clear. The occupation must end. So this is the last 100 years in Palestine under the constant attacks of the Zionist ideology. Now here I want to draw your attention to a very important point that you may find yourself afflicted with if you are talking to people who are propagandizing. The story now is, mostly from like the liberal Zionists, that no, it's just right-wing government. It's just Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, Smotrich. Like they're cultivating that. That looks like it's going to be like the option. Let's get rid of these guys and then maintain the project. Well, these guys are the bad guys. They caused this genocide. Put them, do something with them, right? But that's not the case. It's the whole state and the ideology behind it from day one has always been this way. It's just people weren't allowed to have a live streamed video of it. And all of us as Muslims in here, right, should be careful to not think that what happened in Iraq in 2003 and Afghanistan was not very similar. But there was no such thing as smartphones back then. You didn't get to see all of the death and destruction. And so watch this. This is called continuity of the ideology. The founder of Herzl, the founder of Zionism, Theodor Herzl, he wrote in a book in 1890. His book is called A Jewish State. He says in that book, in Palestine, we shall be a sector of the wall of Europe against Asia. We shall serve as the outpost of civilization against barbarism. Netanyahu, when he just came to speak to Congress recently, he got up there and said, I want to reiterate and make it clear that this is a clash between civilization and barbarism. He is not a new ideology. He's just maintaining the same thing it was founded on since day one. They see themselves as a European outpost. So when Joe Biden says if they're not in Israel, we would spend billions of dollars to make an Israel, he's not talking about, I need my rights to go to the Jewish land and do Aliyah because I'm a Jew. He's a Catholic guy. He's talking about from a senator who has a huge history of warmongering to have this military base and training center right in the middle of the Muslim world as a very strong outpost for their imperial interests. That's what he's talking about. That's what they're trying to maintain. So the world was very close to solving this problem long ago. And this is where it gets to the thick of it. So the UN resolution in December of 1948, they drew up the resolution right at the beginning of the UN after the Nakba, and they said, we resolve that the refugees wishing to return to their homes and live at peace with their neighbors should be permitted to do so at the earliest time. So that is what we call the right of return. Today, 5.9 million Palestinians are considered registered as refugees of the Nakba. So the last time any United States politician spoke in favor of the Palestinian cause was John F. Kennedy. Pay close attention. John F. Kennedy sent his ambassador to the United Nations with a resolution in favor of the right of return for Palestinians to their homeland. In November 21st, 1963, the day before John F. Kennedy was assassinated, the New York Times published a story, and the title is, Israel Dissents as the UN Backs US on Arab Refugees' Right of Return. It begins, this is what the New York Times article says, the day before JFK is assassinated, JFK sent his ambassador with the resolution. A United States resolution calling for continued efforts to resolve the predicament of the Palestinian Arab refugees was approved. 83 votes in favor, 1 against. And the only dissenter was Israel. Since then, no American politician has said one word against the state of Israel in an institutional way, meaning what the laws of the international community should be, what our laws should be limiting their capacity. They can say they've done bad things, like, Jimmy Carter wrote a book about apartheid, but he didn't call for official legislation. Now, John F. Kennedy also called for the mother organization of AIPAC to register as a foreign agent, which will limit their capacity to do all the lobbying that they're doing now to buy Congress and get these laws in favor of genocide. He also did that months before. He called for them to register. And there were multiple communications sent to their leadership saying you have a limited amount of time to comply with this. So we have to think, where do we stand? What is reality? Where do I fit in as a believer? أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه فإنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. There is truth to the statement that the pen of one scholar is more powerful than 1,000 warriors, particularly in the way the world works today. And they know that. That's why they have been working tirelessly for a long time now, some day one, to propagandize and to create a narrative that supports their mission. We as Muslims cannot keep moving on not knowing the facts and not being able to make the case in a very clear, succinct, factual way. We get caught up in emotions and just yelling slogans and wearing watermelons and all of these things. We have to get on the front lines and understand that the Quran is replete, it's filled with statements obligating us to spread truth and justice. وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. These are half of what leads to salvation. The ayah is saying, this surah is saying, you'll go to hell if you don't do these things. إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. Right? There is no way for a believer to sit on the sideline when truth and justice and the sacred sanctity of divine law is being encroached upon. We cannot be on the sideline, and we cannot be emotional reactionary. We have to be strategic, factual, truth, and justice on the front lines. We are watching the murder and destruction and completion of a full-on ethnic cleansing genocide campaign with our taxes here. Your average American has no idea about this. Who's going to educate them? CNN? MSNBC? Fox News? No. You and I are going to educate them, along with the many Jewish and Christian and atheist people who are on the front lines already, speaking the truth against this evil injustice of Zionism. There is no room for us to hope that somebody else will solve this or Allah will randomly solve this. Truth and justice is on our side. People can get all worked up about everything I said here in the khutbah today, but they will not win when you look at the referencing. Everybody will say, no, the facts don't work. You can say and get all worked up, get emotional and say, oh yeah, how dare he say this? Zionism means good things, blah, 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 blah. You can say all of that. But the reality of the facts and the source of the facts say you're a liar. So stop lying. Your lies are leading to mass murder. Stop it. If you were propagandized, rethink what you're believing in and what you're supporting. The facts speak for themselves, very clearly, very obviously, without ambiguity. And that's where we need to be. So these points that we've made, along with some others, we're going to be putting together the youth leadership group that we have in our community here is going to be putting together a project where we communicate and build a bridge. You can't just say, hey, here's a flyer, come to an event, especially with non-Muslims. If it's at the mosque, you have a hard time with that. You have to build bridges. You have to get uncomfortable. What is jihad? By fundamental nature, jihad means to embrace the discomfort of establishing truth and justice. The Quran commands you, وَجَاهِدُوا فِي اللَّهِ حَقَّ جِهَادِهِ هُوَ اجْتَبَاكُمْ وَمَا جَعَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ فِي الدِّينِ مِنْ حَرَجٍ. This is a jihad of the minds. This genocide is being allowed because they have brainwashed the United States public to think there's some sort of both sides conflict happening, instead of an oppressor-aggressor wiping out a whole civilization in ethnic cleansing. That's exactly what's happening. That is not up for debate. Just watch Norm Finkelstein. Just get used to him, okay? Because he's gone everywhere and just mopped the floor with these guys. And they get all emotional and they bring all that. He's the perfect example of how just to stay in the facts, stay in the calm. I don't know why you would say these things, but here's the facts, right? This is the jihad that we're in. If you're concerned about your situation, you can see right now. In the Congress, they tried to bring a law a couple weeks ago, last week, where a citizen who boycotts Israel can go to jail for how many years and be fined $1 million and all that. Do you know who shot this down? This is my point I want you all to pay attention to. We were talking about this. It was the right-wing Republicans who shot it down. Why? Because, yeah, they've been kind of indoctrinated into the pro-Israel and all of that, but free speech, they see other groups trying to stop them from speaking about other issues. And they know that once you allow one group to control free speech, any speech can be controlled. And then you have the tyrant state. So the vast majority of the people who opposed this bill were Republicans, not Democrats. Democrats are propagandist machines. Oh, I'm with you, I care about you. They look at, Malcolm X had them called long time ago. He said, don't trust the white liberal, Malcolm X, 1960, because they are a wolf in sheep's clothing. They were seeing this back then. How you talk to me like this, then behind the scenes you're going along with the oppression and calling me like I'm just trying to have my freedom and rights like any other normal human being here. And so it's very important for us to be strategic and to educate and motivate and advocate and not come on the day of judgment and say, well, ya Allah, I was just an ignorant person and I felt like, my status and my wealth and all those things that I had and my comfort zone was so important to me. And then see what the response would be on that. I mean, if we read the Quran, that's a very, very terrible decision in the grand scheme of things. That is if you believe in the hereafter. People who don't believe in the hereafter think that that's the best decision, to make sure I make the best out of this world and what I have in front of me. The only reason why they're all confused is because the people of Gaza are people who believe in the hereafter. That's what it is. They cannot get this because they don't believe in it. They keep trying to come up with these things to make them break. They're not going to break because it's either Jannah, Shahada, or Nasr and Tahrir. We're either going to have our liberation and be free and have our rights, or we'll go to heaven as martyrs, having been killed standing for our rights. These are the two options. There is no third. There is no option where I go live in the desert of the Sinai while you guys build beachfront homes over here. We all have to join them in this effort. We have to use the power. This is where the power is, this country. Many of you were raised in societies by British and French remote control colonialist ideology to hinder through secularism, through nationalism, through simplicity, to not believe you have power. You were taught you can never do anything. You will not achieve anything. Islam is just something you do on Friday. But history does not agree with that. Just like, see, it's the same thing. History does not agree with, oh, there's a conflict and Arabs were trying to fight the Jews and blah, 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 blah. History doesn't agree with that story. History is a very strong, factual, solid ground to come from. Islam, يَعْلُو وَلَا يُعْلَى عَلَيْهِ. The will of God is something that is exalted and beautiful, that everybody that sees it is impressed and they can see لِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ. This is not about stopping others from believing or whatever. It's to see what is true and what is right by behavior and example. It will become clear that that way is better than that way. That's what the ayah means. And we proved that multiple times in our history. Now is the time to take that effort. Ya Allah, we ask you to give us providence. We ask you to repair our hearts and minds, strengthen our spirituality, strengthen our understanding of our purpose in life. Ya Allah, free us from the colonial brainwashing. Ya Allah, make us a people who stand for what we believe and what we claim in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ya Allah, unify our hearts. Make us a people who are not divided and in conflict. Make us a people who lean on each other, support each other, who love each other, who forgive each other and understand each other. Ya Allah, strengthen us with the faith and values that the Prophet ﷺ taught, and give us the means to success in this life and in the hereafter. The success which is doing your will and living for the truth and promoting the beautiful mission of the prophethood as was taught in the Holy Land and as is taught to be everywhere we go in the planet. Ya Allah, we ask your forgiveness and your mercy that we may be worthy of your ultimate grace and Jannat al-Firdaus al-A'la. Wa salli lahum ala Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.